The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with expensive catering filled the air, but all I could focus on was the way her diamond bracelet caught the afternoon light as she crossed her arms. "You don't belong here, Amelia," Claire said, her voice steady and cold, like she'd practiced the words in front of a mirror. I stood there on her pristine driveway, clutching a homemade gift bag decorated with stickers my grandson had once loved, and for just a moment, I couldn't breathe. How do you respond when your own daughter-in-law tells you you're not welcome at your grandson's birthday party, surrounded by neighbors who pretend not to listen while their children play on a bounce house that cost more than my monthly rent? My name is Amelia, and I've spent the last 62 years learning that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to. I married my husband Thomas when I was 21, both of us fresh out of high school with more dreams than dollars in our pockets. He worked construction, strong hands that built other people's houses, while we rented a small apartment above a laundromat on the east side of town. The rumble of washing machines became our lullaby, the smell of detergent and fabric softener soaked into our clothes and furniture. But we didn't mind. We had each other, and soon we had our son Michael, a boy with Thomas's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. Those early years were hard in the way that poverty makes everything hard. Not dramatic or story-worthy, just the constant weight of choosing between fixing the car or buying Michael new shoes, between paying the electric bill on time or getting the medicine Thomas needed for his back. But there was joy, too, real joy, in the small things. Saturday mornings when Thomas would make pancakes, somehow always burning the first one, and Michael would laugh so hard milk came out of his nose. Summer evenings when we couldn't afford air conditioning, so we'd drag our pillows to the fire escape and sleep under the stars, making up stories about the constellations. We weren't rich, but we were rich in the ways that mattered. Or so I told myself during the lean times when the rent was due and our account was empty. Thomas died when Michael was 17, a workplace accident that happened so fast the doctors said he didn't suffer. I've held on to that detail like a lifeline for 23 years now. The idea that the man I loved didn't feel pain at the end. But I felt it. Oh, I felt it. Waves of it that knocked me down every morning when I woke up and reached for someone who wasn't there. Michael felt it too. Grew up overnight from a teenager who loved video games and basketball into a young man who worked 2 jobs to help with bills. I told him not to. Told him to focus on school, but he had his father's stubborn streak and my practical nature. He worked, he studied, he graduated, and he made something of himself through sheer determination and countless sleepless nights. Michael met Claire at his first real job after college. He was working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, proud of his cubicle and his business cards and his health insurance. Claire was a manager's daughter, visiting the office during her summer break from a private university I couldn't pronounce. She was beautiful in that effortless way some people are, blonde hair always perfectly styled, clothes that fit like they were made for her body specifically, which they probably were. When Michael brought her home to meet me the first time, I saw the way her eyes swept over our neighborhood, the bars on windows, the broken sidewalks, the sound of sirens in the distance. Her smile stayed fixed on her face, but something in her gaze shifted, like she was seeing my son differently now, contextualizing him in his poverty. But Michael loved her, truly loved her, with the kind of intensity that made him save every penny for a ring, that made him work extra shifts for months to afford a proposal at a restaurant where they brought the menu without prices on it. And Claire said yes, she did. And I tried to believe it was love, and not just the appeal of my son's potential, the way he'd pulled himself up and out of the circumstances he was born into. They married 2 years later in a ceremony that Claire's parents paid for, a wedding where I felt out of place from the moment I arrived. The venue was a country club with more forks at each place setting than I'd ever owned, and Claire's mother Victoria looked at my department store dress the way you might look at a stain. She didn't say anything, not directly, but her silence spoke volumes. Michael and Claire moved into a house in Willowbrook Estates, one of those developments where every home looked similar but cost $500,000, where homeowners associations sent letters if your grass grew too tall or your mailbox wasn't regulation height. They had 2 children, first Jackson, who just turned 8, and then Sophia, who was 6. I loved those babies from the moment I met them, loved them with a fierceness that surprised me. They were pieces of my son, pieces of Thomas, too, in the way Jackson furrowed his brow when he concentrated, the way Sophia laughed at her own jokes before delivering the punchline. But I didn't see them as much as I wanted to. Claire always had reasons, valid reasons, that I couldn't argue with. The children had activities, swimming lessons and piano practice and tutoring sessions. They had play dates with children from the right families, meaning families with vacation homes and trust funds. When I did visit, it was always at specific times, usually mid-afternoon on weekdays when the neighbors were at work, when no one would see my old car with its dented bumper and rust spots pulling into their pristine driveway. I understood, or I told myself I understood. Claire was protecting her social position and, by extension, protecting Michael's career opportunities. In neighborhoods like theirs, reputation mattered. Appearances mattered. I worked part-time at a grocery store, stocking shelves and running register during busy hours. My apartment was small but clean, 1 bedroom with a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, but the rent was affordable and the landlord was kind. I sent birthday cards to Jackson and Sophia every year, always with a little money inside, $10 or $20 that I'd set aside from my paychecks. I called Michael every Sunday evening, our standing phone date that he rarely missed. We'd talk about his work, about the kids' latest accomplishments, about everything except the growing distance between his life and mine. I was proud of him, genuinely proud, even as I felt myself becoming a secret he kept hidden. The invitation to Jackson's 8th birthday party arrived on a Tuesday, stuck in my mailbox between a bill and a furniture store flyer. It was printed on thick paper, the kind that felt expensive between your fingers, with gold lettering that announced a celebration at their home. I held it for a long time, reading it over and over. This was the first time I'd been invited to a family event at their house, the first time I'd been included in something that involved their social circle. My hands shook as I set it on my kitchen counter, propped against the sugar container where I'd see it every morning. For 2 weeks, that invitation was the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I looked at before bed. It felt like progress, like maybe things were changing, like maybe I was finally going to be a real part of my grandson's life instead of just a voice on the phone and a signature on birthday cards. Looking back now, I understand that hope, when it's built on shaky ground, is just another word for heartbreak waiting to happen. I spent 3 days preparing for that party, more effort than I'd put into anything in years. My budget was tight, always was, but I wanted to give Jackson something meaningful. Store-bought toys felt impersonal, and besides, Claire made sure those boys had everything before they even knew to want it. So I made a memory book, spending hours at the public library using their computer and printer. I gathered every photo I had of Jackson, from the grainy pictures I'd taken on my old phone to the few printed photos Michael had sent over the years. I arranged them chronologically, adding little captions in my careful handwriting. Jackson's first steps, 10 months old. Jackson's first day of kindergarten. Jackson holding his baby sister for the first time. Each page was a piece of his life that I'd been part of, even from a distance. I bought a nice album from the craft store, spent $22 I'd been saving for new work shoes, and carefully placed each photo inside the protective sleeves. On the first page, I wrote a message in my best cursive. To my dear grandson Jackson, every moment with you is a treasure. With all my love, Grandma Amelia. It wasn't much, not compared to what I knew he'd receive from Claire's family, but it came from my heart. It was real, it was personal, and I hoped it would show him that someone loved him simply because he existed, not because of what he had or who he knew. The morning of the party, I woke up before dawn, too nervous to sleep. I took extra care getting ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on a pale blue dress I'd worn to a coworker's retirement party last year. It was clean and pressed, modest and appropriate, but I knew the moment I looked in the mirror that it wasn't going to measure up to whatever the other guests would wear. The fabric was polyester, the hem slightly frayed at one corner despite my attempts to fix it. My shoes were comfortable flats, practical and worn, scuffed at the toes no matter how much polish I applied. I didn't own jewelry except for my wedding ring, a simple gold band that had thinned over the decades, and a pair of pearl earrings that had been my mother's. They weren't real pearls, but they looked nice enough. I wrapped Jackson's gift in birthday paper I'd found on sale, added a stick-on bow, and placed it carefully in a gift bag. Then I sat in my kitchen for 20 minutes, drinking coffee that had gone cold, trying to calm the flutter of anxiety in my chest. I told myself I was being ridiculous. This was my grandson's birthday party. I had every right to be there. Michael had confirmed I was invited, had seemed genuinely happy when I called to accept. But something in the back of my mind whispered warnings I tried to ignore, a sense that I was walking into a situation I didn't fully understand. The drive to Willowbrook Estates took 40 minutes, my old sedan rattling on the highway, the check engine light glowing on my dashboard like a judgment. I'd looked up directions the night before, written them on a piece of paper since my phone didn't have a data plan. The neighborhood looked even more impressive in daylight. Street after street of large homes with perfect lawns and decorative mailboxes. I passed a woman jogging with a dog that probably ate better than I did, a man washing a car that cost more than I'd make in 5 years, children riding bikes that looked like something from a magazine. Everyone looked like they belonged there, like they'd been born understanding the rules of this particular world. Michael and Claire's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a 2-story colonial with cream-colored siding and black shutters. The lawn was immaculate, edged with flower beds that looked professionally maintained. Cars lined both sides of the street, expensive vehicles with spotless paint jobs and current-year registrations. I parked at the far end, my car looking out of place even from a distance, and sat for a moment gathering my courage. I could hear music and laughter floating from the backyard, the sounds of a party already in full swing. I was 15 minutes late. Traffic had been worse than expected, and I'd gotten turned around twice trying to find the right street. I grabbed Jackson's gift and my purse, checked my reflection one more time in the rearview mirror, and made my way up the sidewalk. The front door was open, propped with an elegant doorstop, and I could see straight through to the backyard where balloons and decorations turned the space into something from a children's movie. I hesitated at the threshold, unsure whether to knock or just walk in. Before I could decide, a woman I didn't recognize appeared in the hallway, holding a glass of wine and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Oh," she said, her smile faltering slightly as she took in my appearance. "Are you with the catering company?" The words hit me like a slap, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "No," I said quietly. "I'm Jackson's grandmother, Amelia." Her eyes widened slightly, a flash of something that might have been embarrassment or surprise. I couldn't tell which. "Oh, of course, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. Please, come in." She stepped aside, but the damage was done. She'd looked at me and seen service staff, someone who belonged in the kitchen rather than among the guests. I walked past her with my head up, but my hands were shaking as I clutched Jackson's gift. The house was beautiful inside, all hardwood floors and modern furniture, photographs in expensive frames hanging on walls painted in fashionable neutral tones. I could see into the kitchen where actual catering staff moved efficiently, preparing trays of food that looked more like art than anything you'd actually eat. Through the large windows that overlooked the backyard, I could see the party. There must have been 30 or 40 people out there, adults clustered in groups holding drinks, children running and playing around an elaborate bounce house shaped like a castle. Tables were set up with white linens and centerpieces, and a dessert table displayed a 3-tier cake that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I made my way through the house toward the back door, feeling the weight of my inadequacy with every step. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a social event, a display of status and success. And I, in my discount dress and worn shoes, was walking proof of where Michael had come from, a reminder of the poverty he'd escaped. Just as I reached the door to the backyard, I saw Claire. She was talking with a group of women, all of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine, all of them laughing at something someone had said. Claire wore a white sundress that made her look elegant and effortless, her hair pulled back in a style that looked casual but probably took an hour to achieve. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and something shifted in her expression. The smile stayed on her face, but her eyes went hard, calculating. She excused herself from her group and walked toward me with purposeful steps. "Amelia," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I didn't expect you to actually come." The words were confusing. "Michael said I was invited," I replied, holding up the invitation as if I needed proof. "I wouldn't have come otherwise." Claire glanced back at her friends who were watching with barely concealed curiosity, then looked at me again. She took my elbow, her grip firmer than necessary, and guided me away from the door, back toward the hallway where we had some privacy. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice low. "This party is for Jackson's school friends and their families. It's a social event, you understand. We're trying to build connections, important connections for Michael's career." I felt my stomach drop, but Michael said, "Michael sent you that invitation without discussing it with me first," Claire interrupted, her tone sharpening. "He thought he was being kind, including you, but he didn't consider the implications. These people, they're our neighbors, his colleagues' families, potential business contacts. They have expectations about who they'll interact with at these events." The meaning behind her words was clear, even if she wasn't saying it directly. I wasn't the right kind of person for this gathering. My presence would embarrass them, would remind everyone that Michael came from nothing, that he'd married up, that he wasn't truly one of them, despite the house and the cars and the carefully constructed image. "I'm his mother," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm Jackson's grandmother. This is my family. And you can see him another time," Claire said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "We'll arrange something, just the 5 of us, somewhere private. But right now, at this moment, your being here is going to cause problems. People will ask questions. They'll wonder who you are, where you came from, why you look so—" She paused, her eyes sweeping over my outfit with barely disguised distaste. "Different from everyone else." I stood there, the gift bag hanging from my hand, feeling the sting of tears I absolutely refused to let fall. Behind Claire, through the window, I could see Jackson running with other children, his face bright with joy, completely unaware of the conversation happening inside his house. I'd traveled across the city to be here, had spent money I didn't have on a gift I'd made with love, had believed for just a moment that I might finally be included in this part of my family's life. And now I was being told I didn't belong, that my presence was an embarrassment, that my love for my grandson mattered less than social appearances. "Where is Michael?" I asked, trying to find some anchor in this situation. "I need to talk to my son." Claire's expression hardened further. "Michael is networking with some potential clients by the pool. He's working, Amelia, even at his son's birthday party, because that's what it takes to maintain this life. And I won't let you disrupt that because you can't understand basic social dynamics." Something in her tone, the casual cruelty of it, the way she said my name like it tasted bad in her mouth, sparked something in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an accident or poor communication. Claire was telling me, directly and without apology, that I was not welcome in my grandson's life when it mattered, that my role was to exist in the shadows, to be acknowledged privately and denied publicly, that I was, fundamentally, something to be ashamed of. "You don't belong here," Claire said finally, the words I'd been dreading, the words she'd been building toward. "At my child's birthday party, among these people, in this world, you're a reminder of everything Michael has overcome, and your presence undermines everything we've worked to build. So I'm asking you, as kindly as I can, to please leave." The backyard sounds continued behind her, laughter and music and children playing, a party that would go on whether I was there or not. The gift bag felt heavy in my hand, suddenly foolish. A grandmother's handmade love in a world that measured worth in price tags and brand names. I looked at Claire, really looked at her, and saw not just my daughter-in-law, but a woman who had learned to value appearances over authenticity, status over substance, a woman who would reject her children's grandmother at the door rather than risk social embarrassment. And I opened my mouth and responded with words that would change everything between us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what I said and why I mattered, you need to know what happened next. You need to see what I discovered in the days that followed, because my response in that moment was just the beginning of a real-life story that taught me more about family, worth, and dignity than I'd learned in all my years before. I left that house without seeing Jackson, without seeing Michael, without giving my grandson the gift I'd spent days preparing. Claire stood in the doorway and watched me walk back to my car, making sure I actually departed, making sure her embarrassment drove away in a rust-spotted sedan. I drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over because the tears came so hard I couldn't see the road. I sat in a grocery store parking lot and sobbed, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken, the kind that leaves you exhausted and hollow. When I finally composed myself enough to drive home, the afternoon sun was still bright and cheerful, completely indifferent to the emotional story unfolding under its light. Other families were out enjoying the weather, fathers pushing children on swings at the park I passed, mothers spreading picnic blankets on green grass. The world continued on, full of people having normal Saturdays, while I felt like something fundamental had cracked inside my chest. I didn't call Michael that night, couldn't bear to hear his voice, to have to explain what his wife had done, to force him to choose between his mother and his marriage. Instead, I sat in my small apartment and looked at Jackson's gift, still wrapped and undelivered. I opened the album and went through it page by page, each photo a memory that suddenly felt painful. Here was a moment I'd captured, a second of my grandson's life I'd been part of, and now I was being told those moments were contingent on my invisibility, my willingness to exist only when convenient. Sunday morning, I woke up with a headache and a hollow feeling in my stomach. I made coffee, burned toast because I wasn't paying attention, and sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. My phone rang at 6 in the evening, our usual time for Michael's weekly call, and I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk to him yet. I needed to process what had happened, needed to figure out how I felt before I could articulate it to anyone else. He called again an hour later, and again I didn't answer. The third time, he left a message. "Mom, it's Michael. Claire said there was some confusion yesterday, that you came by but couldn't stay. I'm sorry I didn't see you. Work emergency, I had to step away to take some calls. But I want to reschedule. Maybe next weekend you could come by when it's just us. Call me back, okay? Love you." Confusion. That's what Claire had told him. Not rejection, not humiliation, not the truth of what she'd said and how she'd said it. Just confusion, a simple misunderstanding that could be smoothed over and forgotten. I listened to that message 3 times, hearing the innocence in my son's voice, the genuine regret that he'd missed seeing me. He didn't know. Understanding the deception, Claire hadn't told him the real story, had rewritten the narrative to protect herself, to maintain the image of the loving daughter-in-law who would never do something so cruel. Monday morning, I went to work like always, stocked shelves and smiled at customers, and tried not to think about what had happened. But my coworker Janet noticed something was off. We'd worked together for 5 years, had shared lunch breaks and small confidences, and she knew me well enough to see when I was hurting. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked during our afternoon break, both of us sitting on plastic chairs in the employee room with vending machine coffee. "You look like you haven't slept." I told her the whole story, words spilling out in a rush now that someone was actually asking, actually caring enough to listen. Janet listened without interrupting, her expression growing more upset as I described what Claire had said, how she'd said it, the casual way she'd dismissed my relationship with my own grandson. When I finished, Janet reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's cruel," she said simply. "That's just plain cruel, and you didn't deserve it. You're one of the kindest people I know, Amelia. Your daughter-in-law should be grateful Jackson has a grandmother who loves him so much." "But maybe she's right," I heard myself say, voicing the fear that had been growing since Saturday. Maybe I don't fit in their world. Maybe my being there would hurt Michael's career, make things harder for him. He worked so hard to get where he is. Janet's expression hardened. "Now you listen to me. Your son's career success doesn't require you to disappear. Your grandson's social status doesn't require you to be ashamed of who you are. You worked hard your whole life, raised a good man under impossible circumstances, and you've got nothing to be embarrassed about. That woman is trying to make you feel small so she can feel bigger, and you can't let her." Her words helped, gave me something to hold on to during the long week that followed. I still didn't call Michael back, sent him a text instead saying I'd been busy with work and would call soon. He seemed satisfied with that, sent back a heart emoji and a promise to talk later. Meanwhile, I tried to figure out what to do with this new understanding of my place in my son's family. Was I supposed to just accept it? Show up only when invited to private, hidden gatherings? Pretend I hadn't been told I was an embarrassment? Thursday evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, figured it was probably a robocall or someone trying to sell me something I didn't need. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Hello? Amelia? Hi, this is Brenda Hutchins. I'm Jackson's teacher at Riverside Academy." My heart jumped. Was something wrong with Jackson? Was he hurt? "Is everything okay?" I asked quickly. "Oh yes, he's fine," Brenda assured me. "I'm calling because Jackson mentioned in class this week that he was disappointed his grandma didn't come to his birthday party. He said you'd promised to come, and he'd been excited to show you his new things. I have him here for after-school tutoring, and he asked if I could call you. Would you like to speak with him?" Tears sprang to my eyes immediately. "Yes," I managed to say. "Yes, please." There was a rustling sound, and then Jackson's voice, small and uncertain. "Grandma?" "Hi, sweetheart," I said, forcing my voice to sound cheerful even though I was crying. "I'm so sorry I missed your party." "Mom said you had to work," Jackson said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "But I thought you said you'd be there. Did I remember wrong?" So Claire had lied to him too, created a different story to explain my absence. Of course she had. "No, honey, you remembered right. I did plan to be there, but something came up and I couldn't stay. I'm really sorry. I made you a special present though, and I'd love to give it to you. Maybe we could meet at the park sometime soon." "Okay," Jackson said, sounding a little brighter. "There's a park near our house. Could we go there on Saturday? Mom takes us there sometimes." We made plans, just Jackson and me, for Saturday morning at 10. I'd bring his gift and we'd spend time together, just the two of us. After we hung up, after I spoke briefly with Brenda, who seemed like a genuinely kind person concerned about her students' well-being, I sat with my phone in my hand and felt something shift inside me. My grandson wanted to see me. He'd been disappointed I wasn't at his party. He'd asked his teacher to call me. Whatever Claire thought or wanted, Jackson himself still cared. Friday morning, I called Michael. He answered on the second ring, sounding happy to hear from me. We talked about normal things for a few minutes, his work, the weather, before I took a breath and said what I needed to say. "Michael, I need to tell you what really happened at Jackson's party." There was a pause. "What do you mean? Claire said there was confusion about the timing." "No," I said gently. "There wasn't confusion. Claire told me I didn't belong there. She said I was an embarrassment, that my presence would hurt your career, that I should leave. So I did." The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Michael said, his voice strange and tight, "That can't be right. Claire wouldn't say that. There must be some misunderstanding." And there it was, the choice I'd been dreading. Believe his mother or believe his wife? I couldn't force him to pick a side, couldn't make him see what I'd experienced if he wasn't ready to see it. "I'm just telling you what happened," I said quietly. "What you do with that information is up to you. But I want you to know that I love you and I love Jackson and Sophia, and I'm not going to disappear just because your wife thinks I'm not good enough for her social circle." "Mom," Michael started, but I interrupted him. "I'm meeting Jackson at Willowbrook Park tomorrow at 10. He asked me to come. If you or Claire have a problem with that, you'll need to tell him yourselves. But I'm not going to let him think his grandmother doesn't care about him just because your wife is ashamed of where you came from." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking. I'd never spoken to my son like that before, never forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. But something had changed in me over the past week. Maybe it was Janet's words. Maybe it was hearing Jackson's disappointed voice. Maybe it was just that I'd reached a limit I didn't know I had. Whatever the reason, I wasn't willing to simply fade away anymore. What happened next would teach me just how much more there was to this story than I'd ever imagined. I'll continue adding emotional tags to the rest of the story. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, October weather settling in with a chill that required a jacket. I woke early, nervous energy making sleep impossible, and spent an hour getting ready. I wore jeans and a sweater, comfortable clothes appropriate for a park, and I carried Jackson's gift in the same bag I brought to his party. This time felt different, though. This time, I'd been invited by Jackson himself, and no one could tell me I didn't belong at a meeting my grandson had requested. I arrived at Willowbrook Park 15 minutes early and sat on a bench near the playground, watching other families arrive. Saturday morning was busy, lots of children running around while parents drank coffee and chatted. I felt less out of place here than I had at Claire's house, even though many of these families clearly had more money than I'd ever seen. Parks were equalizers, spaces where children just wanted to play and adults mostly just wanted to sit and relax. At exactly 10 o'clock, I saw them approaching from the parking lot. Not just Jackson, but Sophia too, both children walking ahead of Michael and Claire. My heart clenched at the sight of my son, at his familiar walk and the way he carried himself. Claire's expression was unreadable behind large sunglasses, her posture stiff with what I recognized as anger. They were here, but they weren't happy about it. Jackson saw me first and broke into a run, his face lighting up with genuine joy. "Grandma!" he shouted, and I stood just in time to catch him as he threw his arms around my waist. Sophia followed more slowly, shy as always, but smiling when I knelt down to hug her too. "Hi, my sweethearts," I said, fighting back tears at the simple warmth of holding them. "I've missed you both so much." "We missed you too," Jackson said seriously. "Why didn't you come to my party? Was work really that important?" Before I could answer, Claire spoke from behind him, her voice artificially bright. "Grandma Amelia's job is very demanding, Jackson. She couldn't get away. But she's here now, so why don't you go play for a little while? Your father and I will be right here on this bench." It was a clear message. They were staying, watching, making sure I didn't say anything that would contradict the narrative Claire had constructed. Jackson and Sophia ran off toward the playground, and I was left standing awkwardly near my son and his wife, the tension thick enough to choke on. "Michael," I said quietly, "can we talk?" "We can talk right here," Claire interjected before Michael could respond. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of both of us." I looked at my son, really looked at him, trying to see past the expensive jacket and the careful grooming to the boy I'd raised in that apartment above the laundromat. "Did you tell her what I said on the phone?" I asked him directly. "About what really happened at the party?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Claire before answering. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding on all sides. Claire explained that she was concerned about overwhelming you with such a big gathering, that she thought it might be more comfortable for you to visit when things were quieter." The lie was so smooth, so completely different from what had actually been said, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Claire had rewritten history, and Michael had chosen to believe her version. Or maybe he hadn't chosen. Maybe he just couldn't afford to believe mine, couldn't afford to see his wife as someone who would reject his mother at the door. "That's not what happened," I said, keeping my voice level with effort. "And you know it's not, Michael. Your wife told me I didn't belong there, that I was an embarrassment, that my presence would hurt your career. She didn't mention my comfort. She mentioned her reputation." Claire's face flushed, visible even behind her sunglasses. "That is absolutely not what I said. I suggested that maybe a smaller gathering would be more appropriate, that you might feel more comfortable in a less formal setting. You're twisting my words to make yourself a victim, and it's not fair." "Then why did you lie to Jackson?" I asked, looking at her directly. "Why did you tell him I had to work instead of telling him the truth, whatever you think that truth is?" "Because children don't need to hear about adult complications," Claire said sharply. "Because Jackson doesn't need to know that his grandmother showed up uninvited and inappropriately dressed, and then got upset when I tried to handle the situation delicately." There it was, the real accusation. Uninvited, even though Michael had confirmed my invitation. Inappropriately dressed, because my clothes weren't expensive enough for her standards. The words hung between us, and I watched Michael's face as he processed them, saw the moment he realized his wife had just contradicted her own story about being concerned for my comfort. "Claire," Michael said slowly, carefully, "Mom was invited. I sent that invitation myself. She didn't show up uninvited." "You sent it without discussing it with me," Claire shot back, her composure cracking, "without considering what it would look like to have her there. Dressed like that, clearly not fitting in. Those were important people, Michael. Your boss was there. The Hendersons from your firm were there. What were they supposed to think when they met your mother in her discount store dress, driving that embarrassment of a car?" The truth was finally out, raw and ugly. Michael's face went pale, and I watched something dawn in his expression, something that looked like shame. Not shame of me, I realized, but shame of what he was hearing, of seeing his wife's true feelings exposed in harsh daylight. "How dare you?" I said quietly, and both of them turned to look at me. "How dare you judge me for working an honest job and driving an old car and wearing clothes I can afford? I raised Michael alone after his father died. I worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed. I taught him values that apparently didn't stick, like respecting people regardless of their bank accounts. And I will not stand here and be insulted for being exactly who I've always been, an honest, hard-working woman who loves her family." "Mom," Michael said, his voice breaking slightly, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I came to my grandson's birthday party because I love him. I brought a gift I made with my own hands because it was personal and meaningful. And your wife looked at me like I was trash she needed to sweep off her doorstep. So now you have a choice, Michael. You can believe her sanitized version where she was just being considerate, or you can acknowledge what really happened. But either way, I'm not going to be hidden away like I'm something shameful. Jackson and Sophia are my grandchildren, and they deserve to know their grandmother." Michael stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he processed everything. "Claire," he said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it, "did you really tell my mother she didn't belong at our son's party?" "I was protecting our family," Claire said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "Protecting the life we've built. You don't understand what it's like, constantly managing appearances, making sure we're accepted in this neighborhood, in your professional circles. Your mother showing up like that, it would have raised questions." "Questions about what?" Michael asked, and the pain in his voice broke my heart. "About where I came from? About the fact that my father died when I was 17 and my mother worked herself to exhaustion to give me opportunities? You want me to be ashamed of that?" "I want you to be successful," Claire said desperately, "and success in this world requires certain standards, certain expectations. Your mother doesn't meet those expectations, and I was trying to spare everyone the awkwardness of confronting that reality." The playground sounds continued around us, children laughing and playing, completely unaware of the family drama unfolding on this park bench. I could see Jackson and Sophia on the swings, pumping their legs to go higher, their faces bright with simple joy. They didn't know yet that their parents were arguing about whether their grandmother was good enough to be part of their lives. "I need to think," Michael said finally, looking between Claire and me. "I need to process all of this. But Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting you from this." "You shouldn't have to protect me from your wife," I said gently. "You should be able to trust that your family will treat each other with basic respect and kindness. But I appreciate your apology, and I love you." Claire stood abruptly, her sunglasses slipping down enough for me to see tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of anger, of someone who'd been exposed and didn't like it. "Fine," she said. "Have your relationship with your mother, but don't expect me to facilitate it. Don't expect me to welcome her into our home or include her in our social events. She can see the children on her own time, in neutral locations where she won't impact our reputation." She walked away then, heading toward the parking lot with stiff, angry strides. Michael watched her go, his expression torn, and I could see the conflict written across his face. His wife, his mother, his career, his conscience, all pulling him in different directions. "Go after her," I told him, quietly. "You have to live with her. You have to make your marriage work. But Michael, please don't ask me to pretend this didn't happen. Don't ask me to accept being treated as less than, as something to be ashamed of." "I would never ask that," Michael said, and he hugged me tightly. "Never. Working on it. I just need time to figure out how to fix this, how to make everyone understand that you're not something to hide, you're someone to be honored." He left then, following Claire, and I was alone on the bench. But not alone, because Jackson and Sophia came running over, breathless and happy, asking if I'd brought them presents, asking when I'd visit again, asking all the questions grandchildren ask when they love someone and that person loves them back. I spent 2 hours with them that morning, pushing them on swings, watching them go down slides, sitting on a blanket and sharing the snacks I'd brought. I gave Jackson his memory book, and he looked through it with wide eyes, pointing at photos and asking me to tell him stories about each one. Sophia sat in my lap and played with my hair, the way she'd done when she was younger, and for those 2 hours nothing else mattered. But when I drove home that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that the confrontation in the park had only revealed the surface of a deeper problem. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have guessed, was that the real discovery was still waiting for me, and it would change everything I thought I understood about my son's family and my place in it. 2 weeks passed without hearing from Michael. He didn't call on Sunday, didn't return my messages, and I started to worry that Claire had won, that he'd chosen his marriage over his mother and was now figuring out how to tell me. I kept working, kept living my simple life, but a heaviness had settled over everything. Janet notices at work kept asking if I was okay, kept offering to listen if I needed to talk. But there wasn't much to say. I was waiting, stuck in limbo, unsure whether I still had a son or if I'd lost him to a woman who valued status over substance. Then, on a Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, rarely had visitors, so I looked through the peephole before opening. Michael stood on my doorstep, and he looked terrible. His hair was uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed, his usually neat appearance disheveled. I opened the door immediately, fear clutching at my heart. "Michael, what's wrong? Are the kids okay?" "The kids are fine," he said, his voice rough like he'd been crying. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he walked into my small apartment, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was, in a way. Maybe he'd never really looked before, at the worn furniture and the patched curtains, and the kitchen where everything was old but spotlessly clean. He sat on my couch, and I sat beside him, waiting. "I found something," he said finally. After the confrontation at the park, I started paying more attention. Started noticing things I'd ignored before. Claire's spending habits, the way she talks about people, the way she's been managing our finances. And Mom, I found something that changes everything. He pulled out his phone and showed me a bank statement, pointed to a line item that meant nothing to me at first glance. "This is a transfer," he explained. $5,000 sent to Claire's personal account from our joint savings. I asked her about it, and she said it was for household expenses. But I checked the household account, and there's no corresponding deposit. So I dug deeper. Over the next hour, Michael laid out a story I never would have believed if I hadn't heard it from him directly. Claire had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for over a year, small amounts that added up to nearly $40,000. She'd been using it to fund a lifestyle Michael didn't even know about, spa treatments and designer purchases and social events that she'd told him were covered by her part-time job as a consultant. But there was no consulting job. Never was. There never had been. She'd been living off their savings while pretending to contribute financially. "But that's not even the worst part," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I found emails between her and her mother, Victoria. They were planning, Mom. Planning how to slowly push you out of our lives, how to make sure the kids didn't get too attached to you, how to eventually convince me that contact with you was more trouble than it was worth. They called it managing the family image. They had strategies, timelines, specific steps they were going to take." I sat there, stunned, trying to process what I was hearing. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why would they do that?" "Because Victoria is ashamed of where I came from," Michael said bitterly, "and she raised Claire to value the same things. Appearances, status, the right kind of connections. They saw you as a liability, a reminder that I'm not actually from their world. And they were systematically working to erase you from our family." He showed me the emails on his phone, and I read them with growing horror. They were calculating and cold, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person who loved them. One email from Victoria suggested that if I could be encouraged to move away, perhaps to another state where living costs were lower, it would solve the problem naturally. Claire had responded enthusiastically, suggesting they could even help fund such a move, make it seem like they were being generous, while actually removing me from convenient access to my grandchildren. "After I found all this," Michael continued, "I confronted Claire. Really confronted her, demanded the truth about everything. She admitted it. And she admitted it, Mom. All of it. Admitted that she's been lying about her job, lying about the money, lying about her intentions toward you. Her justification? She said she did it all to protect our family, to give Jackson and Sophia the best possible life. But what she really meant was to give them a life that looked good on the surface, regardless of who got hurt in the process." "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. "I'm leaving her," Michael said, and the finality in his voice told me he'd already made the decision. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm fighting for custody of the kids. I won't have them raised by someone who thinks love is conditional on bank accounts, who thinks family is something to be curated like a social media feed. I won't let them grow up believing that their grandmother is someone to be ashamed of." Tears were streaming down my face now, but they were complicated tears. Sad for my son's broken marriage, angry at what Claire and Victoria had done, relieved that the truth was finally out. "I never wanted to break up your family," I said. "You didn't break up anything," Michael said firmly. "Claire did this. Claire and her mother, with their schemes and lies and twisted values. You just existed, Mom. You just loved us honestly, without conditions or expectations. And they couldn't stand it, because it reminded them that real relationships aren't transactional." He stayed for 3 hours, and we talked through everything. He told me about his plans, about the apartment he'd already rented not far from my place, about the custody arrangements he was hoping for, about how he'd been blind to Claire's true nature because he'd been so grateful that someone from her world had chosen him. He cried, I cried, and by the time he left, something had shifted between us. The distance that had been growing for years had suddenly closed, and I had my son back, really back, in a way I hadn't realized I'd lost. But I also knew that this discovery, as painful as it was just the beginning. Claire wasn't going to accept Michael's decision quietly. Victoria wasn't going to let go of her carefully constructed image without a fight. And my grandchildren were caught in the middle of it all, about to watch their parents' marriage dissolve, about to learn that sometimes the people who seem perfect on the outside are the most broken inside. The climax of this real-life story was still ahead, and it would test all of us in ways I never could have imagined. The divorce proceedings started within a week, and Claire's response was exactly what I should have expected, but somehow still shocked me. She hired an expensive attorney and immediately filed for full custody, claiming that Michael was having a mental breakdown and that I was somehow manipulating him. She painted a picture in her legal documents of an unstable man being influenced by a bitter, jealous mother-in-law who couldn't stand to see her son succeed. She cited my economic status as evidence that I was a negative influence, suggested that my lifestyle was inappropriate for children to be exposed to, and even claimed that my apartment wasn't safe or clean enough for supervised visits. Michael's lawyer, a kind woman named Rebecca who'd handled cases like this before, assured us that Claire's claims were baseless and wouldn't hold up in court. But they still stung. To see yourself described in legal documents as essentially a bad influence on your own grandchildren, to have your poverty weaponized as evidence of moral failing, it cut deep. Michael was furious, wanted to fight back with equally harsh accusations. But Rebecca counseled a different approach. "We take the high road," she explained in her office, the three of us sitting around a conference table covered in documents. "We present facts. Michael's stable employment, his clean record, his genuine concern for the children's well-being. We show that Amelia has been a loving, consistent presence in the children's lives, that her economic situation has no bearing on her character or her ability to be a good grandmother. And we present evidence of Claire's financial deception, which speaks directly to her trustworthiness." So that's what we did. For 3 months, while Michael lived in his new apartment and navigated a temporary custody arrangement where he had Jackson and Sophia every other weekend, we built a case. Not just legal case, but a moral one. We gathered statements from Jackson's teacher, Brenda, who testified that Jackson spoke about me with genuine love and had been distressed when he thought I wasn't part of his life anymore. We got statements from my employer, from my landlord, from neighbors in my building, all testifying to my character and stability. We documented Claire's spending, her lies about employment, the emails planning my systematic exclusion from the family. During this time, I saw more of Michael and the kids than I had in years. Every other weekend, they'd come to my apartment, and we'd do simple things together. Make cookies, watch movies, play board games I'd found at thrift stores. Jackson and Sophia adapted better than I'd expected, seemed almost relieved to be in a space where they could relax, where they didn't have to worry about getting their clothes dirty or making too much noise. They asked questions about the divorce, age-appropriate questions that Michael and I answered honestly. No, Mommy and Daddy weren't getting back together. Yes, they both still loved Jackson and Sophia very much. No, this wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes adults just couldn't stay married. What we didn't tell, what I didn't tell them, what we carefully avoided, was the real reason for the divorce. They didn't need to know about their mother's lies or their grandmother's rejection at the party. Not their burden. They didn't need to carry that weight. When they're older, let them think it was just one of those things that happened, that their parents had grown apart. Later, time enough later, when they were older, to understand the full story if they wanted to know it. Claire, meanwhile, had moved back in with Victoria, had turned Jackson and Sophia's visits with her into showcases of everything Michael and I supposedly couldn't provide. She took them to expensive restaurants, bought them elaborate gifts, signed them up for activities that cost hundreds of dollars a month. She was trying to prove that she was the better parent, the one who could give them the better life. And maybe in material terms she could. But Jackson started having nightmares, started acting anxious and withdrawn. Sophia, too, Sophia, who'd always been shy, became clingy and tearful. Michael documented all of it, not to use against Claire, but because Rebecca said we needed to show how the children were actually responding to the situation. The court date was set for late January, a cold Tuesday morning when everything felt gray and heavy. Michael picked me up early, both of us dressed in our best clothes, both of us nervous despite Rebecca's confidence. The courthouse was downtown, imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings made every footstep echo. We met Rebecca in the hallway outside the courtroom, and she went over everything one more time, making sure we understood what to expect. "Claire's attorney is going to try to make this about economics," she said quietly. "They're going to argue that Michael's decision to leave was reckless, that moving to a smaller apartment and including Amelia more in the children's lives represents a step down for Jackson and Sophia. You can't let them bait you into getting emotional. Stick to facts, stick to love. Stick to what's actually best for the children. When we entered the courtroom, I saw Claire for the first time since the park confrontation. She sat with her attorney and Victoria, all three of them dressed impeccably, looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Claire's eyes met mine for just a moment, and I saw something in them that might have been regret or might have been anger. I couldn't tell which. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the proceedings to order. What followed was 4 hours of testimony that laid bare the reality of my son's marriage. Michael spoke first, explaining calmly and clearly what he'd discovered, how he'd felt when he realized his wife had been systematically lying to him while planning to exclude his mother from their family. He presented bank statements, emails, documented evidence of everything Claire had done. His voice never rose, never got angry, just stayed steady and sad as he described the betrayal. Claire's attorney tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, as a wife trying to manage household finances and social obligations in ways her husband didn't appreciate. But when Rebecca asked Claire directly about the emails with Victoria, about the specific plans to encourage Amelia to move away, Claire faltered. She tried to explain it as concern for family harmony, but the judge's expression made it clear she wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Morrison," the judge said, using Claire's married name even though she'd gone back to using her maiden name. "Did you or did you not tell Mrs. Amelia Hart that she didn't belong at your son's birthday party?" Claire hesitated, glanced at her attorney, then said quietly, "I may have suggested that a smaller gathering might be more comfortable for her." "That's not what I asked," the judge said firmly. "Did you tell her she didn't belong there?" A long pause and then, barely audible, "Yes." "Because of her economic status?" "Because I was concerned about appearances," Claire admitted, and I watched her mother.
Victoria closed her eyes, like she knew the battle was lost.
Then it was my turn to testify. Rebecca had prepared me, but standing in that witness box, looking at the judge and knowing my words would help determine my grandchildren's future, I felt the weight of it all. I spoke about raising Michael alone, about the sacrifices we'd both made, about loving my grandchildren from the moment they were born. I spoke about the birthday party, about what Claire had said and how it had felt to be rejected by my own family. I spoke about the last few months, about the time I'd spent with Jackson and Sophia, about how they'd flourished when they were allowed to just be children without worrying about appearances. Claire's attorney tried to make my poverty an issue, asked pointed questions about my apartment, my car, my job. But Rebecca objected to most of them, and the judge sustained the objections, clearly unimpressed with the strategy. When they asked if I thought I could provide the same material advantages Claire could, I answered honestly. "No," I said clearly. "I can't buy them expensive gifts or take them to fancy restaurants. I can't give them designer clothes or pay for exclusive activities. But I can give them love without conditions. I can teach them that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. I can show them that family means showing up, being honest, and treating each other with respect, regardless of social status. And I think, in the long run, those lessons are worth more than anything money can buy." The courtroom was quiet when I finished. Claire was crying silently. Victoria looked furious, and Michael was wiping his eyes. The judge made some notes, then announced she'd review all the evidence and issue her decision within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Michael was confident, said he felt good about how everything had gone, but I couldn't shake my anxiety. What if the judge decided that Claire's material advantages outweighed everything else? What if I'd somehow made things worse by being part of this fight? But Rebecca kept assuring us that the evidence was overwhelmingly in Michael's favor, that judges in custody cases cared about stability and honesty, not income levels. The decision came on a Thursday, delivered by mail to Rebecca's office. Michael called me from her office, and I could hear the emotion in his voice even before he spoke. "We won, Mom. Primary custody, and the judge specifically mentioned you in her decision. She said that children benefit from having loving, extended family in their lives, and that economic status is not a valid reason to exclude someone from a child's life. We won." I sat down on my couch and cried, relief flooding through me so powerfully I couldn't stand. We'd won, not just the custody case, but something bigger. We'd won the right to be a family on our own terms, without shame or pretense. We'd won the chance to show Jackson and Sophia that real love doesn't come with conditions or requirements. We'd won permission to be ourselves, honestly and completely, without hiding or apologizing. But even in that moment of victory, I knew the real work was just beginning. Winning custody was one thing. Building a healthy family after everything that had happened was another. And there was still one more confrontation ahead, one final moment where I'd have to face Claire and decide what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of lesson I wanted to teach my grandchildren about grace and forgiveness. The day Michael was supposed to pick up Jackson and Sophia for the transition to primary custody, he asked me to come with him. "I need you there," he said simply. "You're part of this family, and I want Claire to see that, to understand that she can't erase you or make you invisible anymore." So I went, driving with Michael to the house in Willowbrook Estates that had once seemed so impressive and now just looked like a house. Expensive, but empty of the things that actually mattered. Claire's car was in the driveway, and through the window we could see her moving around inside, packing bags for the children. Michael took a deep breath, squeezed my hand, and we walked to the front door together. Claire opened it before we could knock, her face carefully composed but her eyes red from crying. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since this all started, and I saw something in her expression that might have been shame. "They're almost ready," she said quietly. "I just need a few more minutes." "Can we come in?" Michael asked, and Claire hesitated before stepping aside. The house looked different somehow, less perfect, more lived in. There were toys scattered on the floor, dishes in the sink, signs that the carefully maintained image had slipped without Michael there to share the burden. We stood in the foyer awkwardly while Claire went upstairs to get the children. I could hear her voice, muffled through the ceiling, talking to Jackson and Sophia in tones that sounded gentle and sad. When they came down, both children were quiet, sensing the tension even if they didn't fully understand it. Their things. Jackson carried a backpack, Sophia clutched a stuffed animal. Goodbye. They hugged Claire, who held them tightly and whispered something I couldn't hear, coming to us. Then they came to us, and their faces brightened when they saw me standing there beside Michael. Sophia, excited, "Grandma," Sophia said, running to hug my legs. "Are you coming with us?" Confirming, "I am, sweetheart," I said, lifting her up even though she was getting big for it. Reassuring, "I'm going to help your dad get you settled." Jackson's. Goodbye. Jackson hugged his mother one more time, then came to stand beside me, slipping his hand into mine. Claire, watching. Claire watched this, watched her son choose to stand with me, and something in her face crumpled. Turning away, she turned away quickly, but not before I saw the tears. Speaking up, "Claire," I said, and everyone turned to look at me. Unplanned words. I hadn't planned what to say, hadn't rehearsed this moment, but suddenly it felt important to speak. Acknowledging pain. "I know we've hurt each other. I know this situation is painful for everyone. But Jackson and Sophia need their mother, just like they need their father and their grandmother. Moving forward, whatever happened between us, those children love you, and they need you in their lives." Claire, surprised. Claire looked at me, surprise clear on her face. Her response, "After everything I did," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, disbelief, "after how I treated you. You're saying that?" My answer, "I'm saying that because it's true," I replied, not forgetting. "I'm not going to pretend you didn't hurt me, that what you said and did was okay. It wasn't. It wasn't. But I also know that people make mistakes, that sometimes we get so caught up in appearances and expectations that we lose sight of what actually matters. Her role. You're their mother. They need her. They need you." Offering hope. "And maybe, if you're willing, we can all learn to be a family in a healthier way." Michael's reaction. Michael was staring at me, pride clear in his expression. Claire, crying. Claire was crying openly now, not the angry tears from before, but something more genuine, more broken. Self-aware. "I don't deserve that," she said, listing wrongs. "I don't deserve your forgiveness or your grace. I was awful to you. I said terrible things. her motivation. I tried to erase you from their lives because I was ashamed, and that shame had nothing to do with you and everything to do with my own insecurities. Understanding. I know, I said gently. Future hope, and maybe someday you'll forgive yourself for it. Present need. But right now, these children need to know that their parents can co-parent respectfully, that their grandmother and mother can at least be civil. Not asking for friendship. I'm not asking us to be best friends. Simple request. I'm just asking that we put Jackson and
Sophia first, ahead of our pride or our hurt feelings.
Claire wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath, and nodded. Okay, she said. Okay, I can try to do that. And Amelia, I am sorry, truly sorry for how I treated you, for what I said, for all of it. You didn't deserve any of it. It wasn't a complete resolution, wasn't a miracle transformation, but it was a start, a small crack in the walls we'd all built. We left shortly after, Jackson and Sophia chattering in the back seat about what movie we'd watch that night, what we'd have for dinner, normal kid concerns that felt like a blessing after months of tension. As we drove away, I looked back and saw Claire standing in the doorway, watching us go, and something in my chest eased. Over the following months, things settled into a new normal. Michael had Jackson and Sophia most of the time, but Claire saw them regularly, came to school events, stayed involved in their lives. I saw them multiple times a week, picked them up from school sometimes, had them over for sleepovers where we'd make popcorn and build blanket forts. Slowly, carefully, Claire and I learned to exist in the same space without hostility. We'd never be close, probably would never fully trust each other. But we could be civil. We could both show up to Jackson's school play without making it awkward. We could both attend Sophia's birthday party without anyone being told they didn't belong. Victoria, Claire's mother, was another story. She never apologized, never acknowledged that her values and influence had contributed to the situation. But she also stopped interfering, stopped trying to control how Claire interacted with us. Michael's made it clear that if she couldn't be respectful, she wouldn't be part of the children's lives, and that boundary held. Sometimes boundaries are the most loving thing you can establish, the thing that protects everyone from further harm. As for me, I kept working at the grocery store, kept living in my small apartment, kept being exactly who I'd always been. But something had changed inside me. I stood a little taller now, spoke up a little more easily. I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by my bank account or my zip code, that loving my family honestly and completely was more valuable than any material advantage I could never provide. I'd learned that grace doesn't mean being a doormat, that you can forgive someone while still maintaining healthy boundaries, that sometimes the most dignified response is to refuse to let others' judgments define you. It's been 2 years now since that birthday party where Claire told me I didn't belong. Jackson is 10, Sophia is 8, and they're thriving in ways that have nothing to do with how much money anyone has. Jackson still has his memory book, adds to it sometimes with photos we take together. Sophia has started a collection of recipes we make at my apartment, handwritten cards with our favorite cookies and casseroles. They've learned that their grandmother's apartment might be small, but it's full of love. That their father's new house might not be in the fanciest neighborhood, but it's a home where they can be themselves. That their mother is working on being better, on valuing substance over surface, even though it's a daily struggle for her. This whole emotional story taught me something important about family and belonging. You belong where you're loved, where you're valued for who you are rather than what you have or what you can do for someone else's image. You belong where people show up for you, where boundaries are respected and honesty is valued. And sometimes, the people who tell you that you don't belong are really just revealing their own insecurity, their own inability to see worth that doesn't come with a price tag. My response to Claire that day at the party, what I eventually said after all the hurt and discovery and confrontation, was simply this: I belong anywhere my grandchildren are, because I'm their family, and no amount of shame or social climbing or manufactured appearances will ever change that. And I was right. I did belong. I do belong. Not because of what I can provide materially, but because love and presence and authentic connection matter more than anything money can buy. If you've experienced something similar, if you've ever been made to feel less than because of your circumstances, I hope this story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by others' judgments. Stand firm in who you are, love openly even when it's hard, and remember that the people who truly matter will value you for your character, not your bank account. If this real-life story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a situation where family dynamics were complicated by money or social status? How did you handle it? Please consider liking this video and subscribing to hear more calm, authentic family stories about navigating difficult relationships with grace and dignity. Thank you for listening.